So one thing I've noticed when upgrading to my Clubman bars is that my throttle cable and my clutch cable are now considerably too long. Now I've managed to kind of tuck them back here behind the headlight to at least get by and make them work, but there are some concerns with this solution, and that is that I'm asking the cables to bend both on the clutch side and on the throttle side at a pretty considerable degree, and what I'm noticing is a little bit of binding, which isn't good and obviously not very safe. On top of that, well, as you can see, it doesn't exactly look great either. So in this video, what I'm going to be doing is shortening both throttle cables and the clutch cable. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention before I get too far into taking the cables out is that I need to figure out how long the new cables need to be. So what I'm going to do is take this clear tubing that I have left over from another project and basically feed it through the bike along the location of the current cable and use its length as a template for the shortened cable, so I have a pretty good approximation of how short the cable needs to be so I don't make it too short, and that's just the right length to fit the bike. So what I've done here is run the clear tubing from the clutch lever on the handlebar all the way down to the motor to approximate the length of the new cable. And there we had it. And what I've also done is routed it through a route behind the headlight, which is much closer to how the factory would have routed it, not the way that I've kind of stuffed it up here. So I'll still get that freedom of motion that I need. I've reduced the binding, and I've got an accurate template for my cable now with this clear tubing. Alright, same thing for throttle cable. Okay, there's my throttle cable template. And there we go. Last one. Okay, so I've got my two throttle cables and my throttle cable template, which I've labeled. And I've got my clutch cable templates. So the first thing I'm going to do before I even start cutting these cables is to measure the distance from the end of the shield of the throttle cable to the end of the cable, because that needs to be the same when I reassemble the entire cable. If that changes, I'm going to run into some problems. So one thing I need to make sure that I do when shorting these cables is to ensure that this distance from the end of the cable shielding to the end of the actual cable is maintained. So as I shorten the cable, that distance needs to stay the same so that the cable can do its job accurately. So what I've done is pulled the cable tight, and measuring, it looks like I've got right about at 2 and we'll call it 2 5/8 of an inch. So I'll write that down somewhere, and by writing that down I mean I'll just go back and rewatch this video so that I remember where that is. And then for my two throttle cables, which are different, as you'll notice here. Are they different? I guess they are. Pretty good. I'm just going to take a piece of tape and mark the cut location. We're not taking off a lot, but it's just enough to tighten the cables up a little bit. Same with this. It's not a lot, but it's just enough to just bring it in a little bit. And in fact, if it ends up being a little long, I can always go a little shorter the next time around after doing a little test fitting. So basically what I'm saying is cut long if you want to play it safe, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Okay. Alright, tips removed. So now I've got the outside shielding of the cable shortened to where I want it to be. I'm going to put the tip back on. so that I can measure the cable accurately. And is the barrel from the end of the cable. So what I'm going to need to do here is file it down and then drill a new hole to pass the cable through. Okay, so here's the deal. I've tried 2 different hardnesses of drill bits to get through this factory cable end with very little success. So what I've gone ahead and done is picked up this 1/4 inch steel rod, which I'll just make my own ends out of. I'm not really sure why that other one was so difficult to drill through. Must have been an alloy that was incredibly hard, I'm not sure. But I should have no problem drilling through this steel rod to button up this cable. Almost. Okay, so what I've done here, hopefully this comes into focus, is expanded one side of the end so that when I expand the cable, the ends of the cable, when I fray the ends of the cable open, I'll show you here. So I fray the ends of the cable, this little opening fills with lead filler. It makes a nice solid connection to keep this end on. So what I've done here is expanded the end of the cable through the new end, and I've cleaned all of this and degreased it with a carburetor cleaner to make sure it's absolutely grease free. So what will happen here is I will get my lead set up and melted, and when the lead melts through here and solidifies, making a good solid contact between the cable and the end, I'll just lightly grind off these little frayed ends with it so that it creates a nice smooth end. Learn to talk. So what I'm going to do next is take my flux and carefully brush it onto my nice clean end here. The flux gives the lead something to stick to, and what I've gone with is this Mastercraft 6040 tin and lead solder. Okay, so I've got a little copper pipe end here that I'm gonna melt my 6040 solder in. Now what I'm being careful to do is not get the cable down in there, but just to get the end of the tip. I'm going to do a quick test fit of the new end here, and yeah, it fits perfect. I was just taking apart the rear throttle cable, and I discovered that it was binding quite a bit, and pulled out the internal metal line and found some pretty bad corrosion in there. So obviously I don't want to move forward with this cable and shortening it because it's probably going to break at any time. So instead of running the risk and shortening this cable and putting it back in the bike, I think the best thing to do is probably to source a new cable and then shorten that new one. Okay, so next video I'm going to finish up this other throttle cable and either find a replacement and shorten it, or see what I can do about repairing this cable. Perhaps I can just replace it with a pre-spooled one. I have no idea, I gotta figure it out. So I'll put the cables back on in the next video, get the bike back together, do some adjusting because I'm sure they're going to need to be adjusted, and maybe get into what I'm going to be doing next in the spring. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.